Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Emily Molden, Executive Director of the Nantucket Land Council, and I'd like to welcome you to a special edition of this year's Clean Water Series, Topics on Tap. This is the first of a two-part series focused on engaging the community around the importance of our water resources. Nantucket, like many communities across the country and around the globe, has realized that clean water is not only critical to the surrounding ecosystems, whether freshwater wetlands, ponds and lakes, or harbors and oceans, but that it's also absolutely critical to sustaining the overall health of every individual, the well-being of all inhabitants. I believe that the awareness in general has raised pretty significantly over the last several years. We're reading more and more about water issues in the newspaper and stories online. We hear it discussed more frequently at local select board meetings and other regulatory boards and commissions. And I know I certainly hear more and more day-to-day discussion about water concerns on a regular basis. Locally, clean water impacts our culture and our tourism, as well as recreational interests. But here on Nantucket, there are also many residents who have built their lives around it. Our guests today will primarily be talking about their experience in our harbor resources. We've invited some community members to share their stories, their impressions, and their firsthand experience relative to their specific industries and livelihoods that are all in or around the water. Part 2 of this series, which will take place on Thursday, April 15th, will be taking a broader view. We've invited David Prescott, who's the North Atlantic representative of the Waterkeeper Alliance, to speak with us on April 15th. The Waterkeeper Alliance is a global network of grassroots organizations that are all working to protect everyone's right to clean water. Dave will talk about the Waterkeeper movement on a regional and a global level, which the Land Council was thrilled to join this past year as the Nantucket Waterkeeper. Dave will work with our guest, Thais Fournier, the water resource specialist for the town of Nantucket, to talk about how we can better engage our entire community around the issue of clean water and what we can all do every day in order to support the cause. But back to today's presentation. I've asked our guests, Josh Eldridge, Melanie Kotalac, Simon Edwards, and Tara Riley, to all take some time to talk a little bit about their own industries in and on the water, what changes they have seen over the years, and how they've been impacted by those changes, as well as what they feel Nantucket should really start to focus on in order to better protect the harbors and our water environment. Tara Riley doubles as someone whose career revolves around the harbor and the health of our harbor ecosystems, but she also wears the hat of shellfish biologist for the town of Nantucket. So she is really at the forefront and on the front lines of the town's ongoing initiatives to further research and restore these systems. So I look forward to hearing some clean water perspectives from our guests from this critical part of our island community. There will be some time at the end of the program for questions and answers. So I would encourage you during the talk, if you think of a question that you would like me to field to our guests at the end, you can enter it in the Q&A box down at the bottom of your Zoom screen if you're using a laptop or a computer, and we will wait until the end to address those questions. So let's get started. First, I'm going to ask Josh Eldridge to join us. Josh was born and raised here on Nantucket. He's been working on the water since at least the age of 13. And he's currently the owner and operator of Monomoy Charters and of Critter Cruises. So welcome, Josh.
Yeah, Emily, so much for having us, for having me. Yeah, as you said, my name is Josh Eldridge. I'm currently owner operator of Molden Charters and Critter Cruise, which is an eco tour in Nantucket. Grew up on the water, fishing with my grandfather, my father. Learned to scallop from them at a young age. Have seen a myriad of issues throughout my career on the water. Everything from loss of environment to invasive species. There's a lot, and you don't have to look too far to find anything. I think one of the biggest things that we're facing right now on the waterfront is habitat. It's we're losing the grass faster than we can plant. When I was a kid, to be 4 or 5 feet long, just floating on the surface of the water, and now you can barely find any. So that's definitely going to be a problem going forward, and how we handle that. Luckily, we have some options. Invasive species. Since I was a kid, we never had black sea bass here, and now we have thriving populations of black sea bass. Even the little ones, people don't really realize that that they're basically little baby locusts. They eat every shellfish around. They eat baby scallops. They eat crabs. They eat everything in the harbor, and the harbor's full of them. So I don't even begin to know how to handle that situation. It's going to be interesting going forward as far as how it's impacting me personally in my my position as Critter Cruise. Negative impacts. It makes my job harder to find certain species. Like lobsters are much more fine now, but that's also due to climate change as the lobsters crawl further north. So that's one thing, but the black sea bass issue, once again, not helpful. It does provide me a lot of interesting talking points on the trips to help educate people and about the different issues Nantucket's facing. I don't know, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. The grass is the big part. I mean, we are lucky that we have Tara Riley at the Shellfish Lab. The fact that the town takes our water quality so seriously, to invest so much and so much time, effort, money, and resources in developing the lab to save the waterfront. We're very lucky to have that. And Tara has proven time and again that she can raise all the animals we need. We just have to have to find homes for them. So, sorry, just reading my notes here. The town's done a great deal with nitrogen loading, as far as fertilizers and so forth. Still room to go on that, but at least it's a conversation and it's going forward. Thankfully, we have a bunch of oyster farms. Thank you, Simon. They're helping to clean the harbor and do their part, and the up harbor where the environment is most at risk. So we're very fortunate. Sorry, don't spend much time in front of camera. Nervous. Things that we could do to be helpful going forward. Talking with Alyssa Novak when we were doing our eelgrass transplant. She brought something to my attention that I never really thought about, that there's other strains of eelgrass, especially to the south of us, that would be much more tolerant with climate change and warmer water. It'd be nice if we could think about maybe trying to bring in some of those hardier species to replace our natural eelgrass. It looks like we're going to lose inevitably, no matter what we do with climate change. There's only so much that we can do with that. We can only plant so much grass. So, that's one thing. Other avenues we could take for protecting the environment, or the marine environment anyways, is moorings. I know it's been a hot topic in the town for years, and it goes back and forth. And I'm in the industry. I see both sides of it. But there's a time and place for it. I think moorings, especially in the shallow water, go into a much more environmentally friendly mooring, which has been talked about for years. It's time. It's time to at least start trying something. Back in 2018, even the United States Coast Guard started changing their mooring systems for all their aids to navigation. They have 4 test sites off St. Pete that they're seeing what chain scour does on sensitive marine bottom. So, even the federal government takes it seriously. And it's a problem all over the world, not just Nantucket. They introduced a, excuse me, in, was it Dorset, England? They entered in 2016. They changed over an entire bay's mooring system because they found 25, what was it, short snout seahorses, which are apparently endangered. And that was good enough to have them convert everything over to eco-friendly moorings. Door more moorings or the elastic moorings. So as water and sunlight become, or sunlight penetration in our water column becomes more of an issue with suspended sediment from storm runoff, from boat usage, all the different things, makes it real hard for the eelgrass for the sun to penetrate the water and feed the eelgrass. So anything we can do to increase water quality, get more eelgrass health, it's all going to make it a better in the long run for the environment. Other things that we could do in the town is the anchorage. The auxiliary anchorage is a huge problem. On Hussey Shoal, we lose more grass in a single top than we could plant in years. You have boats that are totally inappropriate in the mooring fields now. There are 140 foot, 180 foot boats that are anchoring up with a couple 100 feet of chain. These boats are, they're meant to go around the world. They could easily anchor outside the harbor and spare a bottom. How you handle this from an administrative point, it's not easy. There's no easy solution. So it's just a discussion that we need to have as a community, what we want to see going forward. There are places in the harbor where the older fashioned moorings and anchoring are appropriate. Pulpus Harbor, it's kind of a critically degraded habitat, in my opinion, right now. It's been nothing but mud. So there's not a whole lot that needs to be done or could be done to fix it right now. But the shallower water is definitely where I think we can start to focus our trying to recover some habitat. It might seem like a little bit, but every little bit helps. Let's see, just looking through my notes here. Even silly things like the amount of ferries that we have nowadays coming in and out of the harbor. I'm sure everybody's seen the fact that we have ferries stacked up that don't even have a place to go in the harbor, waiting for other ferries to leave. It seems silly, but their ferry wakes, as they come in and out through the no wake zone, have changed the outer bar along the horse shed. They push it further up on top of the horse shed, which is covered more grass. There's no reason that these ferries can't operate at a reduced speed even further than the no wake zone, or extend the no wake zone, just to get them to slow down as they make that turn at Brand Point. They throw a nice big roller across that bar and it just pushes it a little further back every time. So, even small things that you don't think about, change everything. I think in the near future, we really need to have a serious conversation about cruise ships in Nantucket. And I know some people must be thinking, cruise ships, we have that one weird, ugly one that shows up once a week. Well, they show up once a week and they anchor up for 10 hours. So essentially 2 tidal cycles, and that anchor chain grinds on the eelgrass. Well, one ferry line isn't a huge problem, but the fact that with COVID, you have ferry lines all over the world changing how they operate. I think you're going to see Nantucket looked to by other ferry lines. They're all converting over. They're doing shorter trips, so they can do a faster turnaround and have space in between one trip to the next to to clean and sanitize by new CDC regs. Disney today just released that they've now changed their entire cruise operation to 3 and 4 day cruises, no more 7-day cruises right now, because they just need the time to do the switch. And I know before COVID in 2018, we had 2 visits. I want to say it was American Eagle brought a cruise ship in here as a test. So, you know, that's very real that could happen, and something that we might want to talk about proactively instead of trying to talk about it reactively once, you know, ferry shows up with a couple, or a cruise ship shows up with a couple hundred people that they're trying to drop off. I know up here in Maine, where we are right now, Bar Harbor built their entire economy around cruise ships. It's pretty much crashed right now. So, you know, also thinking about looking at a sustainable Nantucket, not just the waterfront, but how the industry functions. You know, I'm trying to think here. I mean, most of it is just eelgrass habitat and just responsible usage. I mean, over the last couple of years, you know, you've seen usage in the harbor go up, I don't know, 10-fold, 20-fold. Luckily, a lot more of it's educated people now, educated boaters. People are treating the environment more responsibly. The days of just throwing an anchor anywhere has seemed to come and gone. And, you know, people now try to anchor sensibly. You know, I'm not saying it happens 100% of the time, but what does? You know, but there's a lot more knowledge in the community in general, in the on the water industry. There's just a lot more thought given to everything than what there once was. I know fishing with my grandfather and my dad, when we started bay scalloping, you know, the first week, 2 weeks, you had no idea how the season was, because all we were doing was moving grass. We were just breaking the grass down so we could get to the scallops. Nobody back then ever had any idea of the consequences of what actions we were taking and what we were doing to the environment. But you know, hopefully it's not too late. Hopefully we can start turning some things around. I don't know. I don't think I've really got more than that. I mean, there's so much that's outside of our capabilities of changing. Climate change, we're not handling that on a local level. But you know, we're super lucky that we have the town that has the interest in the waterfront and in the harbor. You know, we're lucky to have Tara raising the animals, and, you know, administratively, you know, like I said, there's moorings, there's nitrogen, there's, you know, shoreside development, all already ongoing topics. You know, it's just, when are some of them going to come to fruition, and, you know, we'll start to see some changes, hopefully. Can't really think much about any more than that. You still there?
Great. Thanks so much, Josh. Really appreciate hearing your perspective there. I think you touched on a lot of important points, from water chemistry, nutrient issues in the harbor, to just the physical ways that we're using that environment, that space. So next, I would like to go to Melanie Kotalac. Melanie has been on the island for over 30 years, year-round, and she has been working on the water for pretty much that entire time, scalloping, working with moorings, and as co-owner of Grant Point Marine until just recently. So thanks for being here, Melanie. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, Josh, you're talking about the cruise ships. I know that they've run aground on the scallop beds a lot of times. And that's the one thing that I've seen most of on the water, is the progressive traffic. There's more boaters, it can increase the chance of accidents, oil leaks, and gas leaks. Unaware boaters can cause damage to the harbor by running aground, or grinding their propellers on the scallop eelgrass. But I think that there's some things that they can do about boaters. You can take a boating class, and I think in Massachusetts it's the law that if you own a boat, you need to get a boating license. And I think that the auxiliary Coast Guard gives that, or you can do it online. And discharge, I think, is an important thing about having a lot of boats. It was a record amount of boats sold from Brand Point Marine this summer. There were more people boating than ever. And I don't think a lot of people knew what it was all about, but there's no federal discharge zone on Nantucket, and more boats need to use the pump out dock. It needs to be updated, or a boat can come to you. I think a lot of newer boats don't have the option of doing anything else but going to the pump out. They don't have the Y valve anymore. But that needs to be regulated. There also is an increase in lawns around the waterfront, which I'm not a landscaper, but I know that there's runoff from there, and there's runoff from the streets, the drainage, which needs to be updated as well. But with the Nantucket Shellfish Association, they've used a lot of their funds to address issues like testing the water. I think they want to put a new testing lab here, but it hasn't gone through. I don't know about the moorings so much that Josh was talking about. There's always been moorings. They can drag sometimes, but mostly it's been pretty safe, and there's only a certain area that you can put the moorings in. So I think that's pretty regulated. And if you have something permanent, I don't know if that really works for Nantucket. The bay fishery of scallops, it used to be from Maine all the way to Long Island. But now you really only see a set on Nantucket or the Vineyard, occasionally Long Island. But there is any kind of pollutants really affected. There is a perfect yard handbook pamphlet that can come out that you can get. And it talks about safe, beautiful landscapes for clean water. And this is in the Hamptons, where they have been so affected by runoff. But in the marine industries, I've noticed that you can really make a difference if you buy things that are better for the water, like even your sunblock. There's a number of sunblocks that are reef friendly that also would affect the eelgrass here. And the state of Hawaii has totally blocked anything that has oxybenzone in it. Here are some of the better, I don't know if you can see it, but you can get that. We at Brand Point Marine would sell All Good, which is reef friendly, and it's really better for the environment. They're talking about making it a law here as well. I'm not sure if that'll go through. But some things that you could have on board your boat that you can get from the ship store, which is what Brand Point Marine has turned into, is you now have on a boat, to be safe, you have to have a throwing device, a sound device, an anchor, flares, and what am I forgetting? I forget. But it'd be good to have an oil absorber for gas leaks, because a lot of people don't realize that a lot of gas leaks into the water, and every little bit counts. And there's products that are also dissolved better with salt water and that are biodegradable, and you can clean your boat with them. You can also get them at the ship store. And basically on Nantucket, if you lose the harbor, it's of such important for tourism and for food. So that needs to be addressed. But what the good part is that the lab at Brand Point is propagating a lot, and they check the beds more regularly. And going forward, the community should really focus on education and awareness of the natural resources more. They have dye tabs in certain areas where I've sailed a lot, and when you go into a port, a harbor master will come in and put a dye tab in your tank, and so you don't discharge anything. And that's kind of extreme, but if the environment is really fragile, it might be necessary to do in the future. And I think that's all I have.
Thanks, Melanie. I really appreciate some of the focus that you put on appropriate boat use, just some simple decisions that boaters can make in order to help improve conditions or keep things safe and healthy for the environment. The Land Council, through our Nantucket Waterkeeper, is going to have a small campaign this spring on safe boat use for healthy harbors. So that will play right into some of that messaging. So next I want to introduce our next speaker, Simon Edwards. Simon has been on island since about 2004. He has been oyster farming since 2011 with Fifth Bend oysters up in the head of the harbor. So welcome, Simon.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Simon Edwards. As Emily said, I've been here on the island since 2004. In my previous life before Nantucket, I actually did a master's in aquaculture and have a degree in environmental biology. Got sidetracked a little and didn't really start oyster farming until a few years after I came to Nantucket. The oyster industry on the island was, I think, thriving in the 80s and for some reason went south. I don't know why. Maybe a loss of interest. I think the market also changed a little bit back in the 80s. Since probably, actually, I was really lucky when I first started oyster farming. I think the oyster industry has faced a big resurgence. A lot more people back to eating oysters. And a bigger interest in using oysters as, oyster reefs and a way of water quality amelioration. Honestly, the water quality on the island, I don't think is, since 2011, I kind of feel it's just been bumping along. It's like an old person getting sick. You just never recover quite that far back up each time. And I think, a lot of that is just due to, since 2008, I think the island's population has rocketed. The use of the water, as Melanie and Josh both said, has just increased dramatically. A lot of the problems I've had faced here, oyster farming is kind of an interesting one because in some ways I want a eutrophic hole for my oysters to feed day and night and feel really good and get plump really quickly, and I can sell them really quickly. But the reality of that is that not all algae is good. And if I was to, just push for that, we would be in a big trouble very quickly. 2016, we had there's good algae and bad algae. And then in 2016, we had a huge brown tide or rust tide in Nantucket, and it's a long chain diatom called Cochlodidium. And I think originally it's from Korea. Tara might be able to help me with that one. But, thanks to global warming and ships moving around the world, this stuff is made up and down the East Coast. And quite honestly, I think, as Tara would probably say, I think even when I started, it's been present on the island every year since I've been here. But particularly in 2016, for whatever reason, and nobody can really pinpoint down why this stuff comes. My personal feeling, it's due to heavy rainfall, which would indicate that when we have huge rainstorms, stuff is getting washed off the land, which would be fertilizers, sediments, all sorts of stuff. And I found that every year that we've had heavy rains, we normally see an increase in this Cochlodidium. And I pretty much in 2016 lost an entire year's worth of crust. I lost 800,000 oysters to it. It also affects small scallops. It stops their feeding abilities, and after 2 or 3 days, will kill them. And it's like they're starting to find now that it produces a toxin that is detrimental, especially to scallops. Unfortunately, as an oyster farmer, you have to have, you got to be able to sleep at night, and you can't think about this stuff because a lot of what happens on the water is not like farming on the land. We have no control Like I can't put a fertilizer in, I can't stop the rainfall to reduce the salinity and stuff like that. So what I need is the town to help, and the town has tried with the fertilizers, and I think the landscape industry, to give them credit, has tried as well. I agree with Melanie that we don't need green lawns, but we also have a tourism industry, and we have to be listening to other industries as well. They definitely have tried. I don't think it's perfect. But, like up at the head of the harbor where we have a 90-day turnaround on water quality, or water takes that long to flush water out. I'm sitting on 20 feet of basically dead algae and everything else on the bottom. So I don't think nitrogen is necessary a limiting factor. We also have problems with global warming. I monitor temperatures every year, but I think certain summers are warmer than others. I think, as Josh pointed out, we're starting to see a lot of invasive species. And I think that for the eelgrass is really the critical point, is that we're seeing species that are outcompeting them. We're seeing a lot more algae in the water, so the light is not getting to them. So it makes any kind of like remediation in terms of like replanting, it's difficult because you got to find areas that are shallow enough that they will have a chance to survive. But ultimately, you have to make the whole harbor better. And I don't know how you can do that. It's a really tough question. I mean, we have obviously the runoffs and stuff like that. We've had other issues. I think, the sewer break was back in with that winter. I mean, we were very lucky with that. And then I think the town needs to look very carefully at how the town's main sewer in the old town. I'm not talking about all the good stuff they're trying to do with, the Pulpus Harbor and all that stuff, all those areas that's good. But the town needs to look at its storm drains. It needs to look at old sewer lines and see. I mean, that's the stuff we can touch, because there's so much that we just can't touch, as Josh alluded to, like global warming. We haven't even touched on ocean acidification, which is, requires, global help on that kind of stuff. I mean, there may not be any shellfish in 200 years if we don't control ocean acidification, because they just won't be able to produce larvae that will be able to get shells moving forward. I mean, Tara would probably be able to tell me a lot more about that. Fortunately, on the East Coast, we haven't had that much problem, but on the West Coast, a lot of big oyster hatcheries went through some big problems, and now they treat their water on their hatcheries because of acidic waters. That's the things we can do. I mean, and what I've seen, I have a lease in Pulpus of 2 acres, and in the last 10 years, that is almost completely sanded up, thanks to the loss of eelgrass on Pocono Meadows, which is the area right in front of Pocono Point. When I first was out there, I scalped, I think 2011, there was tons of eelgrass out there. There was absolutely nothing there now. And successive southwest storms and northwest storms have just pushed all that sand off Pocono Meadows right up to those areas where Steve Bender and I have leases. I don't know what you can do for that, It's really tough. I think Melanie alluded to some stuff, like making sure that all the boats on the harbor are trying to reduce their nutrient loading. And if that means putting dye tablets in, that's so be it, Nobody wants to have a harbor that is completely messed up. And that includes all the boaters. That's why they're there. I think people will be more open to it than people are willing, think. I think really people understand this now. There's better education for it. I think I've touched on most. The only other one that I would have, which is my pie in the sky, is open the harbor up at the haul over in some way or another. Dilution is the solution, which is not a popular way of thinking about it, but it might be the only way forward. And every time I've talked to anyone, everyone says there's no way it will ever get permitted, but nobody's ever tried. I know there's tons of engineering issues and stuff like that, but we're sending spaceships to Mars, so surely we can make a hole underneath it all over, or even have it open once in a while. I think that's it. But if everyone just keeps buying oysters, I'll keep helping clean the harbor up. 50 gallons a day each oyster eats. That's a lot of nitrogen.
Thanks, Simon. It's good to know how we can all do our part. Yeah, I know you and I have had many conversations about circulation, and the challenges that the harbor faces with such poor circulation way up there where the oyster farms are. But I do really appreciate your point on really trying to focus on what we can touch, what we can do. I think that's a great way to transition over to our last guest this evening, Tara Riley. Tara has been on island since 2009. She's been really working in the water for about 21 years. She is also with the rest of her family an oyster farmer with Gray Lady Oysters. And I would love to have her speak a little bit also as shellfish biologist for the town about some of the initiatives that are taking place to help to support these systems. So welcome, Tara.
Thank you, Emily. As Emily said, I'm Tara. I'm the shellfish biologist, and I have been on island since 2009. I started out my career after getting a degree in marine biology and then going on and getting my master's in fisheries and aquaculture. And ever since then, I've been involved in the production of finfish and shellfish, both in commercial environments and also in research environments. Most of my focus throughout my career has been in the hatchery, so spawning and reproducing different species, whether it was for profit or for restoration or whatnot. So coming to Nantucket has allowed me to utilize my production knowledge and apply it in a restoration and a stock enhancement setting. So that's the reason why I wanted to come here, because for me, it's very fulfilling to work for a community and, be able to provide a service and work really hard towards restoring a commercial fishery, recreational fishery, and also working with water quality and the habitat that's so important to our island's economy and the history and culture of Nantucket. As Emily said, my family is also involved in oyster farming, so we're definitely all in when it comes to shellfish in and around Nantucket. So I want to apologize first because I couldn't hear Josh with his talk. So if I repeat anything or I missed something, just let me know. But I was able to hear everybody else. So I was going to just go on and say my experience from being here from 11 years is that I have seen quite a few changes in and around the water. I believe there's a lot of pressure on the ecosystem just due to the growth of the island, whether it's population and increased tourism, increased ferry traffic, that sort of thing. I worry that the days of the working waterfront are disappearing. And the fishing culture as well, due to a variety of reasons. And I think all of those reasons are really complicated. I think that there is a loss of habitat and resource. I think that there's a decrease in new entries for the fishery. I also think that there's a loss of knowledge that gets passed down from fishermen that have been really active in the fishery over the years and have retired. I think, there's going to be just like a gap there for new fishermen coming in. I think there's a lot of diversification on the island as far as job professions. I think a lot of people are looking more towards land for working. And I think there's also a general loss of connection to the island as far as the history and culture of what Nantucket used to be. But having said that, there are a lot of things that are happening behind the scenes that the public doesn't always get a chance to see. And Simon kind of alluded to, things seem to operate at a snail's pace around here, but I think it's mostly because a lot of these plans and things that need to be implemented to make improvements in the environment take a lot of work and they take a lot of time, and we need a lot of people kind of chiming in and helping us develop these plans. And then once we have a plan, we need action items and we need people to help carry out these specific things that we're trying to accomplish, and also funding. So things do happen. I think that the town needs to do a better job at getting out updates probably, so that people realize that there are things happening and it doesn't seem maybe so slow. But specific things that we're doing right now with the Natural Resources Department is we always do yearly water quality monitoring. So we test both of our harbors and our great ponds. And we also have the state come through and do fecal coliform testing. And so that's something that's done yearly. We also test for harmful algae blooms by doing phytoplankton counts. And then recently we've resumed doing our habitat surveys, which is a survey of both the shellfish populations in and around the harbor and also the eelgrass health. And that's going to be important for our long-term data sets and determining what kind of changes we need to make and how quickly we need to make them to preserve things like our eelgrass beds. The other thing is the town of Nantucket has developed a coastal resiliency arm to our department. And so we have a coastal resiliency specialist and also an advisory group attached to that position, where we are doing long-term planning to deal with issues related to climate change. We're continuing the fertilizer program, which is getting an update, a regulatory update. And so we're looking at things like, do we need to adjust the timing of the fertilizer application? Or how can we get people to buy the recommended products that are best for the lawns? And finally, compliance, trying to figure out what sort of reporting needs to happen so that we know that people are doing the right thing. On the shellfish front, we just renovated in 2016 the hatchery down in Brant Point to a state-of-the-art year-round hatchery. So we're really focused on enhancing the native shellfish and restoring other species as well. So we deal mainly with bay scallops, but we've also diversified into oysters and quahogs as well. And let's see what else. Also, the Conservation Commission establishment that developed the wetland bylaw. So it provides local control beyond what the state mandates. And so those are all things that are going on. There's also a lot of little, I would call it maybe low-hanging fruit, little initiatives that we're trying to accomplish as well. But as a whole, those are kind of the big chunks of the puzzle that we're trying to piece out. And then the trickle-down effect will happen when it comes to things like if you're worried about tire dust or what's being put on the roads for salting and things that run off into the harbor. I think as far as recommendations that I can give for the community, I think one of the most important things to do is to become involved in where you live, whether that's through volunteering or sitting on a local board for the town or a nonprofit board to help be part of the change. I think participating in town meeting and voting on things you care about, especially environmental initiatives, I think is really important to just be active in where you live. Supporting things like the sewer initiatives and the fertilizer best management practices, also very important. And like Melanie said, becoming a conscious consumer and just really familiarize yourself with like the chemical and the physical impacts that your daily life can have on the harbor. So there's lots of disturbances, whether it's hazardous waste getting poured down the drain or, if you're going to pump out your boat or, how that is going to happen. There's, a lot of physical impacts, like what type of mooring you're going to choose, or, is your prop a little bit too low in the shallow water? Are you, harming the eelgrass bed? Those are all things that you should consider. And then helping to support and preserve the recreational and commercial shellfish fishery, as well as the aquaculture farming practices. I fear that it's going away, and waterfront is being bought up, and the infrastructure that supports these commercial operations is getting smaller and smaller, and it's getting harder and harder to do business on the water. So there are different things that you can do to support, working waterfront initiatives that, kind of pop up around here. You can buy a shellfish permit, whether you like shellfish or not. And then 40% of actually 75% of the proceeds will go to our program towards shellfish restoration and initiatives. So those are all things that you can do to help out. Let's see, did I forget anything? I think, Simon's pie in the sky is not a bad idea. That's also my pie in the sky. I think that it would be interesting to look at an engineered plan or design to open up or have a mechanism to open up the haulover and have a controlled flushing that could occur, during certain times during the year. I don't know that it would solve problems, and maybe it would create new problems, but I think that it's definitely worth doing a feasibility study and seeing what that might look like and the projected water quality that it would help to improve. And I think that's probably all I have. Happy to answer any questions or cover anything that I might have missed.
Thank you, Tara, a lot for that perspective. I think that you're right. It's really important to keep in mind, again, that our clean water is really not just important for the environment itself, but here on Nantucket for a large part of our cultural heritage, for the economy that really supports all of you and so many other people still on Nantucket. We are going to open up questions now. I am going to take a little look at our Zoom question and answer here. We do have a comment from a participant, from Leslie Ford. She's just pointing out, because there was some discussion from a few of you about cruise ships and larger vessels in the harbor, that there is actually in the Harbor Overlay District bylaw that pertains to cruise ships that prevents cruise ship terminals or support facilities owned or operated in conjunction with vessels that are moored outside of the harbor. So that is addressed somewhat in our bylaw. I think that that's a topic that could certainly come up for further discussion. I know that in the next year or so, the town's going to be looking to update its municipal harbors plan, and some of, hopefully a lot of what all of our guests talked about tonight will come up in some of those discussions as well, as far as where there's room to improve or change some of our local policies and regulations around boat use and our harbor environment. We have another question just asking in general, how can we help after seeing this? I think, Tara, I like some of your suggestions. I guess I would just put that out to the rest of you as well, if anyone has any thoughts about something day to day that people can do in addition to buying oysters, to how people can help after hearing about all of this tonight.
Can you hear me now?
I think that you can join the Nantucket Shellfish Association, which helps a lot of the water quality issues, seeding the propagation and the testing lab that they'd like to see happen. And also just making sure, if you're boating, to tying down all the ropes that you have or trash, and not making sure it doesn't go into the water, because it can really affect the marine life.
Thanks, Melanie. And like I said, the Land Council is also going to be embarking on a little bit of a campaign for safe boat use and boating practices. So for folks who are on the water, a lot of those simple things can make a difference. Another question from our participants, probably directed, Tara, to you. When are the new regulations for fertilizer use going to be out? I know that as part of the fertilizer committee, that this was something that had been discussed at the beginning of 2020. And when the pandemic hit, things got a little derailed, but it's good to hear that that's still on deck. And I don't know if you have any other updates as far as when that is likely to roll forward.
I knew that was going to be a question, so I talked to Jeff about it, and he provided me with what the updates were going to be and what they're working on. But there was not yet a date for when they were going to be implemented or finalized.
Great. Yeah, and I certainly am happy to try to get some of that information out there as well. Another thing that I think you started to touch on, Tara, when you were talking before, was the fact that there really are a lot of other initiatives going on between all of the different organizations that are on island that are involved in the marine environment and research and programs to help support clean water out there. I know another one to just put out there that the Land Council and the town have just been talking about is opportunities to potentially expand on some of the eelgrass restoration work that we've been doing in Nantucket Harbor. So there are a lot of different conversations taking place. I think that continuing to look into how something like opening up the haul over might be really beneficial and what other impacts or implications it might have are also really important. Do any of you have any other thoughts that you've had as we've gone along? I don't see any other specific questions from our guests at the moment. I guess I did have one that I could ask all of you that I'm kind of interested in, and that's, I think we probably would all agree, and I heard some of you mention that awareness has generally gone up about the concerns, the reasons to be concerned for clean water, and what some of the things that we need to do. How do we translate that awareness to more engagement and, like you said, Tara, to actually encourage people to get involved and to vote or to support different initiatives or to spread the word, or help out? Do we translate that awareness to greater engagement? Do any of you have any thoughts on that?
I do. I think we talk about this all the time, ways to do educational outreach and how we can best do it. And what we have here, we have a group of scientists that aren't necessarily great at social media and, you know, developing flyers or things to get out to the public. So a lot of times we have to hire people to help us do that work. But I think that's one of the things that Natural Resources really wants to work on, and figuring out how we can reach the community and how we can reach all different ages of community members as well, and just how best to connect with them. I mean, right now we're working with the 8th grade in the public school, and we work with private schools as well. But how do we get into schools with younger kids and help them, you know, kind of learn about these important topics that are right there in their community? So, you know, it's something that we need to develop, and that I hope happens very soon.
Thanks, Sarah. I might talk about to the rest of you as well. Yeah, I was going to ask, in your industries and your line of work, how do you engage with the community, and how do you each personally help to educate folks on water and what they can do? Simon, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think our community has changed dramatically in the last 15 years, 20 years. And I think that culturally, it's really important to go into the schools at an early age and get education done at that point, because, you know, maybe from that culture, they don't have the same love of the environment or respect of the environment. You know, so I think that, I mean, in general, you know, I work with the Land Council. I work with Max and the board at the head of the harbor, and I know that they educate people on water quality as they come up. So, you know, but I think really getting the kids young is the way forward for Nantucket, because that's how you change people's minds. Well, adults are adults to change, but you inspire a child to do something, they're going to do it for life, you know? Sound is awesome.
Yeah, I think we're having a few audio challenges. Melanie, were you going to add something? Hopefully you'll come through.
Yeah, as far as education, people who come into the shop, we've tried to teach them if they're going recreational scalloping. You know, what is a seed and what is not a seed. And also, I think that people that come from other cultures to Nantucket to work and stay here, they weren't always educated, as Simon said, from early on about, you know, don't be a litter bug and don't throw things into the water. And it's a cultural thing. And I know that the Land Council does put out a lot of their information in other languages, which is, I think, very helpful.
Thanks, Melanie. Yeah, we've been trying to prioritize that a lot more for sure. Josh, did you add anything?
Oh, yeah, actually, basically when we started Critter Cruise 15 years ago, was one of the big focuses behind it was education and appreciation for the environment. I think Simon just said it, you know, if they don't know it and love it, you know, they're not going to protect it. So we really have to look to the future generations of Nantucket and everywhere to protect the environment, protect our waterfront. One thing that I learned when we were doing our transplant at Land Council with the eelgrass was how easy that is. And I don't know how many times I've walked by perfectly viable eelgrass and left it to die, not knowing that if you just break off a little bit, you can replant it and it stands a good chance of reattaching and growing. That's something that everybody can do on a day-to-day basis. And I think every Nantucket child going through the school system should be taught how to plant eelgrass. So when they find it, they can do something proactive with it. It's really simple and it takes seconds. But education, awareness, and appreciation, it will make the difference in the long run.
Excellent. Okay, well, I want to thank all of our panelists and thank everyone for joining us this evening. This program and our Clean Water series is made possible by the Nantucket Land Council's Water Fund, which is a fund we have that's specifically designated to support our water research and our water education initiatives and programs. So you can find out more about that on our website, nantucketlandcouncil.org. And I also, again, would just like to invite everyone to return Thursday, April 15th for part 2 of this series, Clean Water for All. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.